Rebel King, membrane theory, very hard. Imagine a bubble of perfect sphericity, soap bubble, floating. Its radius is measured, has a measurement, it's pi, 3.14159 Peter, when you measure it with a ruler, gosh, it's pi. That means its diameter is 2 pi, and its circumference is 3 pi. And so the units, because it's 3 pi, pi times pi times pi, it's pi, that would be pi cubed. But we don't get to pi cubed, we only get to pi squared. It goes radius, pi, diameter, 2 pi, starts to do the hemisphere, and when it's done, the 2 pi relationship of a hemisphere, it's completed the energy cycle. There's a feedback loop is there, you get a straight line and a feedback loop which is longer, of half the circumference. And so that is squared. Its units are squared. Because it's pi times pi, it's pi squared. And so the measurement of the length of the circumference, the units are meter squared. Do you see? It's unique. But it's only when it's perfectly spherical. Because you imagine the perfection we're talking about is that pi is a regular number that goes on forever. So therefore, if there's any difference at all in the 2 pi's, in the relationship between them, in the sphericity of the bubble, then that trick won't work, and that it won't be it won't be a meter square. It'll be something different, less than a meter square. It won't exist as much, because what we're seeing is something that doesn't exist, a relationship, the radius. It's merely a relationship. What does exist is the meter squared, an area. Meter squared is an area. So look, when you're looking at that two-dimensionally, that line, that shape, the rainbow, exists with an area, a measurable area. So that when you then take that back into your bubble, what's happening is that only half the bubble is created in each moment of time, and that the other half is created in the next moment of time. Because if required, because it exists theoretically. If we are an observer of a soap bubble, and the half that gets created is the half that we see, the hemisphere that's created, I'm looking at the half of it. We can't see the other half. We just assume it's there. Our brains tell us it must be a sphere. It can't be a hemisphere. That'd be unnatural. It must be a sphere. So our brains complete the other half of the bubble. But it doesn't exist. From the moment of creation of the bubble to the moment of perception of the bubble, only half the bubble can be created. So what is the bubble? How do we measure it? If it exists, what is it? It's the measurement of Planck's constant, as they call it at the moment. It's a value of h. Their units are energy seconds, joule seconds, but it's energy and seconds multiplied. So you could say, taking it from just the seconds, the duration of the hemisphere construction of this soap bubble has a measurable unit of time, and it's currently 6.626, so they tell us. Seconds times 10 to the minus 34, so a tiny duration. But nonetheless, if you freeze frame a moment of time of you observing a soap bubble, you're only seeing a hemisphere. The other half doesn't exist. It only exists theoretically, because it must exist to hold the front half of it together. So it must be about to be created, but it has an order of creation. It's complex, isn't it? So, and I think I understand it. So what you've got then is 2 inertial frames of reference of the 2 bending moments at either end of that rainbow. And that's membrane theory, an elastic shell with no frame. It creates its own frame through its own structure. And that structure is made of light. And it's called C squared. Do you see? C, it's the hemisphere squared. It's telling you that it's half the bubble, and it has an area. And that area means that the other half of the bubble must be realized as a fact in order to comply with physical law for the construction of a soap bubble. It doesn't have an empty back, it has a complete circle. If it's an empty back, it doesn't exist. But if the construction of it has an order, then there must be a period where the other half only exists theoretically. Now, the value of h should be 2 pi, clearly. Now, you can see why. That it's that pi relationship that makes the square a solid square, that it really exists, the rainbow, properly. If it's too big, then there's a difference between the pi on the top and the pi on the bottom, and the number is different, and therefore the square is not a square, it's less than a square. And a bit, you know, as it's less than a square, it's less existing. It's less powerfully existing, less energetically existing, but it's not existing as much as it did. The theoretical part of the existence is struggling because the actual existence is struggling, because it's got to use more energy to exist, this bit that you see. So by manipulating this energy in the atmosphere is how the mind control works. Because what I've described to you is a bubble of oxygen. It's what oxygen looks like. Forget the molecules that are in it. Forget the matter that's in it. That's just the stuff that is manifesting so that it can be a bubble. It needs to be made of something. C squared must be made of something. So it's the matter that it's made of. It's just that. What's important is the energy, the shape of the energy, that sphere of oxygen, down to that tiny dimension of 6.6 times 10 to the minus 34 seconds duration of oxygen energy is what you breathe. And it contains energy for cognition, for cognitive dissonance. It can be created through the manipulation of the size of the energy of the air that you breathe. And so why I'm saying that Lewy bodies are invented is that in 1915, when Levy published her table about Ich will leve, I will live, what she's showing there is membrane theory has been invented in 1915. And that the idea, and it's the no inertial frame of reference, that's absolutely key, because that's where Newton linked in, that Newton's laws of motion require an inertial frame of reference. There's an addendum at the bottom that says all that stuff is true in an inertial frame of reference. If there isn't an inertial frame of reference, you need to add an addendum to correct that. And it occurs in membrane theory, and it occurred in 1915. And that the Lewy body and the Creutzfeldt and the Jakob, who gave their names to such horrendous diseases, they gave their names to them because they invented them. Because it's the way that you control the energy, it's the twist. By using the coefficient table and digitally impacting on the shape of an analog structure, you break it and you twist it left hand, and that untwists the fibers of light, the 10 to the 42 meter fiber of light that is the power of everything. An infinite number of fibers all twisted infinitely together in a right hand twist, pushing the universe on forever. You twist it left handed, even a tiny fraction, massive difference. And that's what they've done. So the Lewy body and the seeding of physicists and mathematicians and rocket boys around the world in 1933 was a plan to seed this information into us, to enslave us. Yeah? So welcome to the future. Pay attention to my other videos now if you feel like it. Why don't you? Love rules. Do the work. Cheers.